Hello, everyone. It's my pleasure and honor to have been invited by the National Student Yat-sen University to discuss with you the issues of ants living in ancient Buddhist monasteries from India to China. Let's have a look. I will first start with explaining a little bit the Vinaya sources, and especially what they have to say about ants. And then I will focus on two masters of the Chinese Tang Empire, Daoshuan and Daoshi, and see how they interpret the guidelines of the Vinaya in their commentaries, in their Vinaya commentaries, before we come to an overall conclusion. Let's first have a look at the Vinaya sources. As many of you might know, there are 6 extant Vinayas. One in the Pali language, the Theravada Vinaya, commonly used in Southeast Asia up to today. 5 Vinayas have been translated into Chinese. The first 4 Vinayas have been translated in the 5th century. Sarvastivada Vinaya, the Dharmakuptaka Vinaya, the Mahasangika Vinaya, and the Mahishasaka Vinaya. This confronted the Chinese audience with an overwhelming amount of Vinaya data, and it's only logical that they started to write commentaries. In the beginning of the 8th century, one Vinaya, the Silvan Lu, or Dharmakuptaka Vinaya, was taken for the Vinaya to be used for all ordinations in the Tang Empire. This was due to religious reasons, but also monastic, organizational reasons, and political reasons. Still, all the other Vinayas were used for the study of Vinaya rules. Equally, in the beginning of the 8th century, one more Vinaya, the Mula Sarvastivada Vinaya, has been translated into Chinese. Of this Vinaya, many parts are extant in Sanskrit, and a full translation exists in the Tibetan language. The Mula Sarvastivada Vinaya is still today used in Tibetan areas. Very often, one is asked about the historical value of these sources. Can all the data that we find in Vinaya sources tell us something about the history of the period? What is very important to know is that these Vinayas have been written at various times in various regions. So it's actually not describing one time in one region. The Chinese commentators, however, will take all this together. Now, what about the historical value then? Well, these texts are written with an aim. They are written with the aim to create an ideal setting. And so we can learn a lot about the normative values of the authors of these texts. What was the ideal setting? What did they have in mind? How would the Buddhist community ideally look like? Still, one can also learn more about material culture that is described in the Vinaya sources, because objects and practices are at least imaginable. When people discuss scissors, for instance, they must have known what a scissor is and how to use it. And very importantly, as aptly described by Jen Nagler in her work on the Bodhisattva path, the texts reveal incidentals. These are data or messages that are not part of the core message of a rule or a text. They are a little bit on the side. They are there unconsciously maybe, and so historically they are more credible. These incidentals will be very important when we describe the attitudes towards animals in Buddhist Vinaya sources. And of course, one can also corroborate one's findings with the relevant context. Archaeology can help, as well as non-Buddhist sources, literature, but also mural paintings, for instance. Daoshuan will use all these Vinaya texts and much more in his commentaries, and you see on the screen his most important commentary. He makes use of all the texts that are available to him, all the Vinaya texts, but also of an immense amount of other texts, philosophical texts, manuals, and so on. He must have had access to an extensive library. When he discusses animals, he focuses on 3 main principles: non-killing, non-harming, and release of animals. Release of animals can also be found in the Vinyas. There, of course, or there it's rather the release of individual animals. It's not a group event. This is different in Daoxuan's time and certainly after Daoxuan. What is important for Daoxuan is that animals are released and have a free life. This is also the case for Daoshi. But Daoshi, in his what we could call encyclopedic work, will make use of even more text. And here one can see also the agency of ants. Ants as living beings that act. We will discuss that later in this talk. And he emphasizes even more than Daoxuan the karmic consequences of the acts towards animals, but maybe also of the animals. Now let's first have a look at the ants in Vinaya text. We will see how they are classified, how they are perceived, dangerous and annoying, but also how they are seen as ants in need of protection or ants as sentient beings. In fact, the Vinayas do not pay a lot of attention to classification of animals or the classification of ants. Ants in the Mulasarvastivada Vinaya tradition are just listed among the animals with many feet, and this goes along with other insects such as bees and wasps and scorpions. Sometimes they are also listed among weapons, parallel to other animals that sting people. More important, though, is the perception of ants as dangerous animals. This is clear in the Dharmaguptaka Vinaya. A dangerous place, or maybe rather a difficult place to live, Nanchu, is a place where tigers, wolves, lions, bears, and brown bears live, and all kinds of bad animals, up to ants. A difficult place, however, does not only include animals. It can also be a place with a lot of wind or a lot of water. The Mulasarvastivada Vinaya has again a passage on ants that sting people. Monks take a bottle with their hands and then have water flow into their mouths. But ants had first gotten into the bottle and the monks get stung. So one can use water strainers, for instance, or one can just pay a lot of attention in order to avoid the ants, avoid to live in places where dangerous animals live, avoid to be stung by using a water strainer. Ants are not only dangerous, they sometimes are also very annoying, and particularly when they start to eat rope material. For instance, in the Pali Vinaya, it is said that ants eat ropes, just as rats do. And again, one can avoid this by putting the rope material in a safe place, for instance. Mulasarvastivada Vinaya has a lot of examples on grass mats, for instance. And again, one should avoid ants entering the grass. And there are many other examples in the Vinayas that indicate the ants as dangerous or as annoying. So they were definitely all around. In one Vinaya, the Mulasarvastivada Vinaya, the annoyance extends to a further challenge, and that is the reputation and even the moral virtue of the Sangha. Let me give you an example. In this rather long passage, we see how the Buddha was in Shravasti. And I've indicated the passage of the text that demands special attention. At that time, the bhikshus were cleaning the begging bowl and washing their feet just everywhere. And they left the place full of flies and ants. So when they leave, the place is full of flies and ants. And so the Brahmins and householders asked the bhikshus, is this the toilet place of the honored ones? And the bhikshus reply, it's not a toilet place. It's where we clean the begging bowl and wash our feet. And when the householders heard it, they blamed the bhikshus and they said, all the bhikshus lack cleanliness, purity. Cleanliness is more outside, purity is more inside, but the same term is used in the Chinese text, 精戒. When they cleaned the begging bowl and wash their feet, they do not select one place. So we see here a connection between flies and ants, cleanliness and purity, and also the reputation of the Sangha. This is even more the case in the next passage. When inspecting a place with a view to building a monastic lodging, if there are snakes, scorpions, bugs, and ants, maybe taken as one compound, bugs and ants just being ants, and the like, making their holes, that is called unclean, 14, and one should not seek the dharma there. So again, we have the presence of ants connected to something that is unclean and connected to reputation of the Sangha, and even here the reputation of the dharma. One cannot expound the dharma in a place that is unclean. So also in a place where we find snakes, scorpions, ants, and the like, because it's unclean. And that's, of course, very annoying. On the other hand, ants are also very often seen as animals in need of protection. One cannot break off the life of any sentient beings, according to the Vinaya text, even up to ants. Still, the killing of animals in the Vinaya is considered to be a lesser offense than the killing of human beings. If one kills consciously an animal, one commits the so-called pachitika offense. There are very many variants on this term, but it's a lesser offense that needs to be confessed. If one kills a human being, one commits a parajika offense. You can find the term here at the end of this passage. A parajika offense means that one loses one's monastic status forever. Still, monks that are about to be ordained, and that will so be explained what it means to commit parajika by killing a human being, will also be told just before that consciously breaking off the life of any sentient being, even up to ants, is something one should not do. Consciously also means that one intentionally maybe kills it, but certainly also that one is careless. To give you an example, when one walks on the street and one knows there will be ants, one does, in the English sense, maybe not consciously kill ants when walking on the street, but since one should have known that ants can walk in that place, one is careless. And being careless, and so killing ants, also means that one consciously breaks off the life of an animal. So ants are definitely in need of protection. One should not kill. In one Vinaya, the Mula Sarvastivada Vinaya, it goes even a little bit further. Here we have the king of tortoises. The king of tortoises is actually the Bodhisattva, so the later Buddha. He first saves people that were about to drown. But then he is exhausted and he falls asleep on the beach. And while lying on the beach, ants come and they start to eat from his flesh and his blood. He wakes. So basically he could just chase the ants and save his life, but he doesn't. He knows that when he will move, he will kill a lot of ants. So he lets them. He offers his body to the ants. And the ants will therefore also get his blood and flesh, but the blood and flesh, as he will say, is actually also his teaching. So he says, in past lives, I filled them fully with my blood and flesh. Now I have become Buddha, and I fill all beings with the taste of my teachings. So here we have the ants as sentient beings capable of absorbing the Dharma. And this is, of course, a step that is further than the perceptions we see of ants in the other Vinayas. In the other Vinayas, the ants need to be saved by having them in a safe place, so they should not be killed. But here we see ants that can absorb the Dharma. So, if we summarize ants in the Vinaya text, we see that one should avoid the ants, that one should act morally, since the ants are there, they actually somehow force people to become moral, to act morally. And they can also be saved. They can absorb the dharma. But this is only the case in one vinaya, in the Mula Sarastivada vinaya. And that brings us also to the commentaries, the Chinese commentaries, that also have such ideas. For instance, first, Daoshan. Now, Daoshan doesn't discuss ants that much. But what he generally discusses when he explains the Vinaya is that one should be very careful, not only of the rules of the Vinaya, but also of the working of karma. And he uses for this a Vinaya commentary, the Mingyao Wen. And he says that showing disbelief in the working of karma is actually one of the 4 kinds of despicable acts. He also puts a lot of attention on intention. If one acts intentionally, one experiences heavy karmic effect. And then he refers to a philosophical text, the Chongshu Wen. Therefore, the Chongshu Wen says that killing an ant with an evil state of mind, so consciously, is worse than killing a person with a compassionate state of mind. This is, of course, a very strong sentence. And maybe in another talk, one could go further on this idea. But in the context of animals, it is clear that he wants to say that killing an animal, even if it's a lesser offense in the Vinaya, is actually worse than killing a person with a compassionate state of mind. So it will attract a lot of heavy karma. And so he continues, since the basic karmic effect will be heavy, one certainly receives retribution, even if one expiates the Pachitika offense. So even if the Pachitika offense mentioned in the Vinaya is expiated, the karma will not be annulled. So killing an animal consciously is something very bad. He repeats this idea once more in the same commentary, where he says, as for the third parajika rule on killing, so killing a human being, it is, as the Chongshu Wen says, as said in the Shatpada Abhidharma text, so Abhidharma text, killing a person who has wrong views is a lighter offense than killing an insect or an ant. Maybe again, insect and ant needs to be taken as a compound. The reason is that such a person is polluting the world and causing a lot of damage. So again, one could go further on this idea, but that would be the topic of another talk. But what he certainly underlines here is how bad it is to kill even a very small animal consciously. Daoshan has also written biographies, and in his biographies, the ants appear. As far as I know, in earlier biographies, there is never a reference to ants in the life of a monk. But here, to give you one example, we have the monk Thur, who died in 638, and he is said to have a kind heart. He often walked on his bare feet and was afraid of stepping on ants. So you see that kindness is here linked again to non-killing and the non-killing of ants, and of course also to the intentional killing. More on ants can be found in Daoshan's encyclopedic work. In this work, there is also a small biography of Daoshan himself, who is said to be a great monastic of the Shimingse monastery, the same monastery where also Daoshan lived. And so the Dharma master Daoshan, styled Xuan Yun, is a leader of the Buddhist community. Intelligent even as a young child, at a tender age, he played with a stupa made of sand. He shaved his head, it's an identity marker actually, while he was still wearing the colorful clothes of a youth. His great compassion against Si is such that it brings salvation even to ants. See, so the same idea that compassion has to be brought even to small animals such as ants. And in a very maybe even extreme way, the Tathagata is capable of doing so. Because the Tathagata, the Buddha, in the past purified his mind. He is completely free of attachment, and therefore he stopped harming other sentient beings. Wherever he walks, his feet do not defile, nor does he harm ants. As we will see a little bit further, the Tathagata is actually walking above the ground. So by being completely pure, he can no longer harm. And he saves, in that sense, ants. This is certainly also clear from the next passage. When the Buddha walks, his feet are 4 inches above the ground for 3 reasons. First, he sees that ants live on the ground. Second, grasses grow on the ground. And third, to make the supernatural marks on his feet visible. All the moths, in some variant readings, we have ants here, that happen to be under the Buddha's feet. They were all at peace and stabilized their minds. It reminds us a little bit of the tortoise king offering his body to the ants. Here the ants are very safe, because the Buddha does not walk on them, but they can see the Dharma on his feet. And so they stabilize their mind and they were all at peace. So they again absorb the Dharma with great effect, because they stabilize now their minds. So it has effect on them, and they are also actors in this story. They can also, by just being there and by being saved, they can also transfer karma, or at least the deed of saving them. The act of saving them transfers huge karma to a young novice. A young novice was sure to die, but then he saves ants from drowning and thereby saves his life. It reminds us of the Chinese concept of Paoying. One act creates another act, a reaction on that act. So the ants, by being saved, actually save the young novice. In contrast, when one kills ants, even ants, it can bring people to a rebirth in hell. So Daoshe will also discuss immediate merit, but also he discusses briefly hell, or at least rebirth. The rebirth as a karmic consequence of killing animals, killing ants. So we see in this text compassion, intention, the idea of purity, but also ants learning about the Dharma, and a discussion on immediate merit and rebirth in hell. Rebirth as an ant, though, is, as far as I know, not mentioned in the texts of Daoshe. But at the same time, in Taoist texts, so the same period in Taoist texts, one finds scriptures that discuss rebirth as an ant, as a result of lascivious or promiscuous behavior, as a result of violating the teachings, or as a result of having violated the teaching of the scriptures. I have not found an ant being reborn as a human being later on, but only humans being reborn as an ant. For some animals, one finds both sides, but for ants, until now, I found only human beings being reborn as an ant. So when we come to a conclusion, we see that we have a lot of ants in the vinyas. They are perceived as dangerous, annoying, but also as in need of protection. And in that sense, they force people to be moral and pure. And ants can also advance. They can absorb the Dharma, at least according to the Mulasarastivada Vinaya. Daoshe focuses on non-harming, non-killing, but also on karma and intention. Daoshe introduces more concepts, concept of compassion, intention, purity, ants that learn about the Dharma, immediate merit also, but also a rebirth in hell. So a lot of karmic consequences. But not rebirth as an ant. This is something we find in the Taoist text. And by this, I would like to thank you for listening. You find here a tool and you can use to avoid ants and mosquitoes, but also maybe to stop yourself of having thoughts of harming ants and mosquitoes that might distract you from your meditation. So again, thank you very much to the National Sun Yat-sen University and to all my colleagues over there. If you have any questions, you'll find an email address at the bottom of this slide. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you again.